Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we are doing a single brewer but different style beers review today. And we're jumping over again. I've had many great beers by them. Two new ones for me. It's the Bruery out of Placentia, California. So today we're going to be starting with the Bruery's White Chocolate. This is a wheat wine that clocks in at 14.8% ABV. It is bourbon barrel aged and also brewed with cacao nibs and vanilla. For number two, we're jumping over to Meemaw's famous sticky bun stout. This is an imperial stout, 9.2% ABV, and this one's been brewed with pecans, maple syrup, and cinnamon. So while these are quite a big gap between their ABVs and they are different styles, personally they both sound absolutely delicious to me, and I cannot wait to jump in. So we're going to do just that, starting with the white chocolate wheat wine that clocks in at 14.8% ABV. Okay, so jumping right into the first beer of today's review of beers by the Bruery, we are starting with white chocolate. This is a wheat wine that clocks in at 14.8% ABV. It has been bourbon barrel aged and also brewed with cacao nibs and vanilla. The brewery is based in Placentia, California. So keeping true to fashion with the brewery, their labels always look nice, but they're relatively understated. This one, a beautiful dark midnight blue, has some kind of filigree looking little design on the side of the can. I highly doubt the camera's going to pick that up, but it's a very clean design as always. So nothing further to talk about there. Let's get this cracked gently. Oh yeah. And get this wheat wine poured right in the glass. Oh yeah, that is lovely. Now wheat wines are very similar to barley wines. We've had a few on this channel already, and they share a lot of commonalities. Just wheat is the main versus barley, but same concept. Called wine, not because it's wine, but because of the very high ABV that is much more akin to wine than your average beer. So visually, yeah, this is lovely. This is probably a little bit lighter than your average barley wine would be. All the wheat wines I've had have looked a little bit different, but more or less falling in this kind of caramelly golden color hue zone. So this looks really great, really fantastic beer. They're very thick. As a rule, they're hard to see through. It's not that they're hazy or anything like that. They're just harder to see through due to how dense and thick these beers are. In terms of head, it didn't really do a great head. Wheat wines, in my limited experience with them, tend to be a lot like barley wines. You don't really know what you're going to get. In terms of how the carbonation is happening now, it's still going. It's just a very slow, steady stream of super fine, very champagne-like bubbles that I can see breaching the surface. But it looks fantastic. Let's get over for a proper sniff. Oh yeah. Man, that really smells good. Okay, so wheat wines, again, I keep comparing them to barley wines because they are very, very similar to barley wines. Really, the wheat is the difference. Everything else about them is almost the same for all intents and purposes. So you are typically going to get aromas of toffee, caramel, a lot of deep, rich fruit, some kind of caramelization, burnt sugars, sugar itself. I'm getting a lot of that in this. Now, I do know, obviously, bourbon barrel. Yeah, the bourbon jumps out of you right at the glass, and also cacao and vanilla. I really have to breathe in deeply to think on that. And there's a little bit of the vanilla that comes through, but not that present, and I'm really not picking up any of the cacao at all, at least in the aroma. So let's jump in and see what this one tastes like. Oh, wow. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, that is delicious. That is a big, big, delicious, flavor-packed beer, and it's all over the place. Wheat wines are indeed as complex as barley wines. You have to take multiple sips to get the most out of them. I encourage them being drunk slowly, high ABVs, but also you're going to get much more. Just take your time. They're typically going to have a long finish. linger all around. I can tell you this one has flavor all over, and they're just riveting in and out of one another, and it's absolutely delicious. Every bit as complex as any barley wine. So, the first thing first, there is a slight sweetness to it. There's a slight vinous quality to it. It does come through a little bit. There's almost this grape-like quality that comes through with that slight subtle sweetness up front. Then it's immediate toffee, caramel, and you can absolutely taste the vanilla that comes through in this. You can absolutely taste the cacao that's in this. The cacao for me came in on kind of the back third of the overall intensity arc before it really became present in there. And the bourbon for sure is very clear in here. I'm certain that the bourbon barrel aging really does help to kind of accentuate the vanilla that comes through very clearly. Bourbons, typically if you age a beer in a bourbon barrel, you are going to get some notes of vanilla. And so this already having vanilla in it, that's really going to help make that much more present. And it is quite present. In terms of kind of these underlying fruit characteristics, there are some, but it's much more leaning interestingly on that kind of slightly sweeter, and almost there's a little bit of it that's a little bit tart, and it tastes more like grapes than it does anything else, like wine grapes. But it's quite nice, and it works very well in this beer. Overall, I'm a big fan. I'm going to jump in for body and mouthfeel, finish, and think a bit more on the flavor development. Body on this one is medium heavy to heavy. It's maybe not quite as heavy as you would expect, but it's definitely got a large body. The mouthfeel is quite resistant. I wouldn't call it viscous, but it's very resistant. You agitate around the palate, there's not much happening other than it being agitated around the palate. On second sip, I got a lot more intensifying of these flavors. And everything that I got on the first sip, I stand by. On second sip, I'm picking up suggestions of apricot that are kind of marrying with the grape kind of side that I'm getting on the front. And there, again, that slight tartness, it's still there. Though on second sip, kind of the toffee and caramel side intensified a lot more. And it's not quite as present as on the first sip, but it is still there. So there's a lot happening in this beer flavor-wise, and they are definitely moving in and out of each other, though it does follow a very noticeable, very quick ramp up, hold that intensity before a very slow steep down, kind of the incline ride of flavor intensity. The finish, as I expected on a beer like this, it's not always, but this one is, it is quite long. Lingering on the palate, you're getting that bourbon barrel, and you're getting a lot of the toffee and caramel notes that are coming from this malt bill that are really lingering with you. There's a little bit of that vanilla lingering underneath, and even a little bit of that cacao lingering underneath. But overall, very beautifully put together beer, absolutely delicious. I am going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second beer of today's review, and that is Meemaw's famous Sticky Bun Stout that clocks in at 9.2% ABV. Okay, now jumping into the second beer of today's The Bruery beer review, we have got Meemaw's famous Sticky Bun Stout. This is an Imperial Stout, 9.2% ABV on this one, brewed with pecans, maple syrup, and cinnamon. Now, I won't be shocked if this is actually a milk stout with the lactose, just given the ingredients, but they didn't state that it was, so I'm kind of in for a surprise there. Yet again, very clean label, but nice looking design by the brewery. And of course, you can see pecans and cinnamon sticky buns there all over the label. Kind of get you in the mood for what might be in store. So we're going to get this cracked gently. All right, poured right in the old glass here. Oh, that's pouring reasonably thick, very dark. Yeah. That's thicker than I anticipated. 9.2, I mean, that's not a small ABV, but it's pouring quite a bit thicker than I expected for that ABV range. Formed a nice head. Visually, as expected, it is indeed pitch black. Did form a nice head here. Now, I can tell you, on the sides of the glass, I can see a lot of really super fine, small bubbles kind of coming up, which is probably why this has such a nice, tightly formed head. It does look quite nice. Let's give it a sniff. Yeah, that smells really nice. No doubt about it. That's got a very strong aroma. You can really smell the malt backbone, which kind of surprises me, but absolutely that maple and the cinnamon specifically are jumping out at me in this glass. And it does have a rather sweet aroma to it, which unsurprisingly, brewing with maple syrup, maple in general just kind of immediately makes the brain go there anyway. So even if a beer's not sweet, but it has maple in it, syrup or otherwise, it's gonna impart kind of like a sweet overtone to the aroma. But this definitely smells sweet. It smells rich as well. That malt bill, it smells balanced. The aroma smells balanced. So I'm kind of really excited about what I'm about to get into when I jump in this beer. But let's jump right in. It smells great. Oh, wow. Oh, man. This beer is so good. Wow. Okay. That is absolutely incredible. I've had a few different kind of sticky bun takes in beer form, and this one is by a mile the best I've had to date. I mean, this is just absolutely delicious. This is decadent and it's delicious. And while there was a slight sweetness, I don't know if they're intending it to be a milk stout, but I suspect not, because there's underlying sweetness that comes through and kind of plays up the sticky bun side, but it is not drowning out that deep, rich malt bill backbone to this beer at all. Tons of cinnamon come through. That maple really comes through clearly, and for sure the pecan as well. And I could tell you, using nuts in a beer, I've had a lot of different beers that kind of have nuts in them. Hazelnut works quite well. I've had others with pecans, others with walnuts, doing different kind of baked good iterations. Typically in a stout form, it pairs well to things like that. But sometimes the nuts get lost in the beer. This one, they definitely really built this well. They got the right amount of ingredients to let everything have its own voice. The taste is equally as balanced as the aroma, and it is absolutely delicious. I mean, this is just absolutely delicious. I'm going to jump in for body and mouthfeel. I think I caught both of these, but I want to have another sip because it was a lot of information to take in on that first sip there. So let me jump in again and see what else you need to know. Yeah, yeah. The body and mouthfeel on this are quite large. 9.2, that's not a low ABV, but it's not crazy high up in the range for an Imperial. And man, this is a big body and it's a very thick, viscous mouthfeel. Agitation around the palate just it makes that even more so, and it gets very silky creamy. Absolutely lush mouthfeel to go with this big body and just packed with flavor. Packed with flavor. It really does put me in mind of a sticky bun in beer form, and that is the highest accolade. The Bruery, I've had quite a few beers by them now, and it seems like all of their interesting beer takes, they really take great pains, and it shows because they really do a great job of emulating in beer form what kind of interesting beer flavoring that they're creating. And man, this one is so good. I've had multiple different kind of cinnamon bun, sticky bun type beers. This one just blows them all away. I mean, it's not even a contest. This is seriously delicious beer, and it really does taste like a sticky bun in stout form. What you get up front, you do get that sweetness, and you get the maple first, the cinnamon right behind it. The malt bill kind of comes in right behind that, and then the pecans really start pairing with that malt bill. So it's got a lot of different layers. They're kind of ebbing and flowing in and out of one another, but you do get that sweetness first, and then you get the kind of richer side from the pecans and from the malt bill, and it's absolutely delicious. This is a big beer. It's incredibly well balanced, just loaded with flavor, and I'm going to enjoy every last drop of this. So I'm going to take my time counting my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with the Bruery's white chocolate. This one was a wheat wine, 14.8% ABV. Again, the Bruery is based in Placentia, California. This specific beer was bourbon barrel aged, and it also was brewed with cacao nibs and vanilla. Starting with the aroma. The aroma was massive. These big ABV, especially that have added ingredient beers, tend to have very, very pronounced aroma. This was no different. It did smell a lot like a barley wine. Wheat wines and barley wines are very closely related, obviously wheat versus barley. But this one, just huge pungent aroma, tons of toffee, just tons of caramel, all these other undertones, and you could indeed smell that bourbon very clearly and the vanilla. The aroma gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste, absolutely loved it. I haven't had but a handful of wheat wines, but they do remind me a lot of their barley wine relatives, which is my favorite beer style, but this is very close. I mean, they share a lot of commonalities, and there's some subtle nuances. You get a lot of dried, rich fruits, typically in a barley wine. A lot of figs are kind of undertones, and these, you can sometimes get those as well, but they share that kind of toffee and caramel characteristic in both beer styles, and these tend to be a little more vinous, so there is this wine-like quality, almost this wine grape-like flavor that comes through, but absolutely delicious. Gets a 10 out of 10. For the body on this beer was very big, but not quite as big as I expected for the style to be certain. Didn't miss the mark by much, but it does get a 9 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, again, not quite as resistant and viscous as I expected for a beer of this style in this ABV range, but it was certainly above average. It gets an 8 out of 10. For the finish on this beer, very, very long. Wheat wines and barley wines, in my experience, all have very long finishes. They're just big and bold, very pungent, very flavorful, and they tend to stick around the palate, so the finish really, really lingers. It gets a 10 out of 10. Head and retention. This is a beer style, just like barley wines. You never really know what you're going to get. This one did okay, but it wasn't over the top. I would call it average. It gets a 5 out of 10. For the appearance, this is exactly what I expected to see for a wheat wine. They do tend to be very similar hues, if a bit lighter in appearance, but this was right in the range. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was exceptional. All of these ingredients that go into making the malt bill, plus the added ingredients, were all balanced beautifully. You could pick all of them out in that bourbon barrel, and it was just absolutely beautifully balanced. It gets a 10 out of 10. Feeling the intangible, I loved it. Absolutely delicious. I've really enjoyed the wheat wines I've tried. This was no exception. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this beer cleaned the house in most categories here. It does get a 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on the Bruery's white chocolate to a 92 out of 100. Moving on to beer number 2. This was Meemaw's famous Sticky Bun Stout, Imperial Stout, 9.10% ABV, brewed with maple syrup, cinnamon, and pecans. The aroma, as you would expect with a beer of this style, this ABV range, with those ingredients, it was pungent. I could smell all of them clearly, and also the malt bill, which kind of took me by surprise, but it did smell roasty on the back. Underneath, the aroma gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste, easily the best beer that is tried to kind of make one flavored like this. I've had quite a few sticky bun or cinnamon bun flavored beers. This was the best by a mile. They absolutely nailed it. Just wonderful layers of maple and cinnamon and pecan. And again, that roasty malt bill was really present, which I was pleasantly surprised the whole time I was drinking it. Taste, 10 out of 10. For the body, this was a huge body on an Imperial Stout. 9.2, that's not low ABV to be certain, but it's not as high as many Imperials, and the body was just massive. It gets a 10 out of 10. The mouthfeel was equally impressive on this. This was a very thick, viscous beer that was just creamy and silky. It was everything you want in the mouthfeel in that beer style. Gets a 10 out of 10. For the finish. The finish was longer than average, though it was not quite as long as I expected, given the pungency and intensity of the flavors, but it does get an 8 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did a pretty good job. It was above average, but it wasn't in the top tier of some that you can pour at home. It gets a 7 out of 10. For the appearance, Absolutely pitch black as expected. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was great. Overall, the balance between the flavors that they had and the malt bill I thought were really, really great. One thing as I kept sipping on this over time, I noticed that kind of the intensity of that roasty edge of the malt bill didn't quite push through as great as the other added ingredients. That if you're along sipping on a high ABV beer such as me, maybe you consider a negative. Maybe the average person who drinks beers very quickly won't even notice. But I docked 1 point here. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the feeling and the intangible, absolutely loved it. I think they nailed what they set out to make in beer form. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this is a fantastic flavored imperial stout. And the flavor they chose, really, it's the best one I've had by a mile. Here, it gets a 10 out of 10 from me, which brings the total score on the Bruery's Meemaw's famous Sticky Bun Stout to a 94 out of 100. So only a 2-point spread here, a 92 and a 94, both absolutely top tier beers, different beers for different tastes. Imperial Stout, wheat wine, very high ABV, still high, but 50% lower in effect, but both absolutely delicious and proving yet again that the Bruery just knows how to brew good beer. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop on our videos, go live to YouTube. You can click the notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.